Welcome back to the Ed Morrissey Show podcast. I'm recording this on Friday, and I can't tell you how much fun it is to talk with Christian Toto of HollywoodandToto.com on a Friday. When I'm guest hosting on Relevant Radio, and I'm guest hosting on a Friday, I usually try to get Christian in there. And when he's not available, we try to get Stephen Graydonis because I like talking entertainment on Fridays. I don't know. Christian is, it's kind of a thing with us now, right?
It's the weekend. It's Friday. You have to kind of get a little bit lighter sometimes. And we both cover some heavy stuff, and it's gotten pretty heavy in the last few weeks. So anytime you can exhale slowly, I think is a good thing.
Well, I agree. And we're going to try to keep it on the lighter side today. We're going to talk a little bit about cancel culture. We're going to talk maybe a little bit about Deadspin. I don't know. You wrote about that last week, and that's still not resolved. But what you also wrote about last week, and this is what kind of prompted me to ask you to do this in the first place. You wrote about films in 1999, and I hadn't realized until I read your post what a great year for film 1999 was, with one exception on your list.
Hey, nobody's perfect. Yeah, I look back on years sometimes, and people say, "Oh, I have to write a best of list this year." I don't know what I'm going to do. I got to scramble. It's just not easy. They just don't make that many great films in a single year. But look back at 1999. The Sixth Sense and Office Space, American Beauty. It was Best Picture. Fight Club was in there. Blair Witch Project, which I don't think has aged well, but it really did change the landscape in a lot of ways. And, and I'm blanking on a few other movies, but you can just go on The Matrix. Obviously a huge film in so many ways. So it just was a heck of a year. Election as well. They're all kind of flooding back to me as I speak. But I don't think I'd look back at the 90s and think, oh, that was the decade for movies. I think people think about the 70s sometimes with the grit, the indie spirit, and the 60s was such a revolutionary moment. But the 90s ended with a bang, and it's just a heck of a year. So I wrote about the hits. It was impressive.
When you look back at the 90s, though, and I think that this is one thing that struck me as we were going back and looking through this, is that the 90s are really sort of the last gasp breath of the 1970s. It wasn't there were still too many happy endings. There were still too many, cutesy, sort of contrived, manipulative types of things. But you still had sort of an independent spirit. I think kind of the grunge spirit, grunge was a musical fashion. It was also a fashion, clothing fashion, but there was some of that in film too. Going up to, I think 1989, Fight Club, for instance, is a great example, even though it wasn't on your list. But Fight Club is a great example of that, where you had really interesting material that was done in sort of uncompromising ways. And you can make that argument about American Beauty too, I guess, but I have a lot of other arguments about American Beauty that we can talk about in a moment, but
we don't have enough time. We need at least a day and a half, apparently.
Oh my God. Yeah, no kidding. Don't get me started. I'm just trying to think of some of the other films that, we're going through there. And one of the things I think that makes it different is that we were starting to see sort of the comic book universes coalesce in the 90s, maybe especially in the late 90s, but they really hadn't dug into the box office and hadn't dug into the investment in films the way that they started doing in the next decade, right? And some of those are good films. It's not my cup of tea, but there was a couple of them that were actually pretty good. And you can even look at the Lord of the Rings trilogy, super expensive investment that really pays off, right? And it's done based on literature, and there's a lot of great things that came out of that. But this was really before the mega tentpole type of stuff really started taking place, right? The mega CGI stuff. There was still a lot of room in the 90s to tell small stories.
Yeah, a couple other things here. One is, I think the term PC was beginning to gain steam at that time. And they actually made a movie, PCU, about that, which was
I remember that.
not nearly as good as it should have been, but certainly it poked the beast in a way. Also, I found this. I think someone sent it to me a while ago, but I put it in my book, Virtue Bombs, where Siskel and Ebert actually directly addressed PC and what it means, not just for Hollywood, but for critics, and how you couldn't be PC. That was doing your readers a disservice, which I think was fascinating. But also, Quentin Tarantino came of age in the 90s as well. So he had Pulp Fiction and Reservoir Dogs, and so he had a huge influence on storytelling. And there's a lot of Tarantino copycats, that's not exactly the greatest trend, because there was kind of nihilistic without his artistic flair. But yeah, I think we'll look back at the 90s with much more respect than we expected.
Well, and I think that your post is part of that. I mean, just as a reminder that there were some really good films that were not just really good films, right? But were also pretty well rewarded at the box office.
Mostly, yeah. Well,
Mostly.
Office Space is an example of that movie. It might have made 12 million. I might have that wrong, but it was not a hit. It was a quasi flop. And then year after year, it just built up this cachet. And now we adore it, much like Idiocracy, which was one of Mike Judge's follow-up films. So yeah, sometimes they don't hit right away, but then all of a sudden people slowly realize, boy, that was good. And I think that even Office Space, even though we live in a different time, a lot of us are working at home right now, but there's something about that spirit, the inane bosses, the crazy coworkers. It doesn't go away. It's always a part of what we are.
It's because it talks about people's actual situations, right? It kind of hits us where we live. Idiocracy, depending, maybe, but certainly Office Space hits us where we live. And it's the reason why Dilbert was so popular, is because it was so incisive about something that was it's such a common experience. And I think that I mean, I don't want to get too far into all the reasons why I think that the comic book genre has ruined movies, but that, to me, just to be more positive about it, that to me is closer to the spirit of the 1970s than really the 1980s were, because 1980s were pretty slick, and they were, even the cinematography and the media in which films were shot had a really certain type of unreal feel to them. And the 90s kind of get you back to that grittier, more realistic cinematography, even in films that are pretty heavily special effects, like Fight Club, for instance, where there was certainly had special effects, but it was in service of a grittier story. You had I'm trying to think of some of the other ones on your list.
Well, I think Election is a great example of a movie that probably wouldn't be made the way it was then, because it really didn't have any parallels to modern politics. Like, I mean, you could read into things, but if that was made today, there'd be this Trumpian figure there, and there'd be other allusions, and there'd be a MAGA reference and things. But Alexander Payne, the director, and I'm assuming co-writer or writer, he told a story that was human and relatable. And you could make the connections. You could see how modern politicians might fall into this category or that category, or just human nature. And I think, that's a filmmaker who trusts us to kind of do the math on our own and not really kind of wag a finger at us.
I think actually it was based on a novel. I don't.
That's right.
Maybe he wrote that. Maybe he wrote the novel. Because I remember reading something.
I think Tom Perrotta, if I'm getting the name
Tom
right.
Perrotta. Yeah, Tom Perrotta. You're right. Because they had to change the ending because the ending didn't test well. It has a different ending in the book,
Oh, interesting.
Yeah, apparently, and I mean, I don't think that I have to do a spoiler warner for a film that's been out for like 25 years or so, but apparently in the book, she seeks out, I forget the guy's name, the Matthew Broderick character, and he's selling cars, apparently still in town, and they have some sort of a settlement of the conflict because she's concerned about what life is going to be like, and he actually sort of advises her, and they filmed that. they showed it and the audiences hated it. So they did the whole thing with him in Washington, D.C., which is actually pretty hilarious. It's actually a pretty fun ending.
Yeah,
I got to rent the DVD or the Blu-ray and see, because I think it's on the Blu-ray. I mean, you can look at the alternate ending on that. It would have been interesting to see. But yeah, I mean, that's a film I didn't like very much the first time I saw it either, but it was interesting enough for me to go back and look at it a couple of times, and it's grown on me since then. Maybe more so because I've gotten involved in politics.
Just a coincidence, I'm sure. That's all.
Yeah. But you're right about that, though. And, Alexander Payne's still around. He did The Holdovers, which I haven't seen yet, and I really do want to see.
It's quite good. It's quite good.
Which is, again, telling a smaller human story rather than this epic, CGI type of thing with again, a sort of a grittier, again, I'd say maybe like a 1970s, at least in a 1970s informed perspective. Another good one from the 1990s, though, was Payback. I don't know if you ever saw that one with
Mel Gibson.
Yeah.
I need to rewatch it. I don't think I was as impressed, but maybe I need to kind of check it out again.
Yeah, that was Brian Helgeland, I think. He had just LA Confidential is another one that he was involved in. And he had just come off of that to do Payback, and he wanted to do it as a real 1970s film, right? And the source material was the stuff from the 1960s. I forget the name of the author, but he wrote these gritty, detective or pulp fiction type of stuff, right? And so he shot the ending, which is very 1970ish. It's very indeterminate, and you don't know really what happens. You have to figure it out in your own mind. It's not happy, and apparently the studio fired him because he wouldn't change it. They brought it. Mel Gibson ended up shooting like another 25% of the film. I
didn't know that. Interesting.
Yeah,
it's not a bad plan B. Gibson's a terrific director, but still, you do want to have the original vision kind of consistent, at least.
It was interesting, and I have to tell you, you can buy the original Helgeland director's cut. Right? It was just interesting that there's a guy who just won an Oscar. I mean, literally had just won an Oscar for L.A. Confidential, and he had a vision for this that they hired him to employ and just kick them out of it. And I have to say that I still think I like the original theatrical release a little bit better because it is more satisfying.
Yeah.
But it was also one of these things where it's telling stories about very broken people, none of whom you should really like anyway.
Yeah.
But it was just a really good story. It was a gripping story. And I don't know if it's a get off my damn lawn sort of thing. Christian, but I just don't see a lot of that in theaters.
Yeah. And also, we talk about the death of the movie star who can carry a movie. Yes. I know Mel Gibson's got demons, and he sounds like he's been a rough soul, and I'm really putting it mildly. But he not only is a terrific director, but he's a movie star. He really has something special about him. And I'm sad that he had all these issues, and I'm sad that he hasn't been as active on in front of the camera for a while. I mean, he still does things, but there are a lot of genre stuff, a lot of stuff that frankly is beneath him. But he's just really good. I mean, there are a few actors who just have that sense that you just want to watch him in anything, and he had that. Still does to a degree.
Still does. I mean, he's still working, and I think he's still actually making his own films.
Yeah.
I think they're working on the sequel to Passion of the Christ, if I'm not mistaken, which is going to be huge.
And allegedly, he's going to start directing Lethal Weapon 5 next year. So. A sequel we sorely don't need, but
yeah. Well, that's the other problem too, is that we keep going back to same old stuff. That's a different conversation for another day. Anyway, if you go to hollywoodandtoto.com, it's a really great piece about films of the 1990s, with the exception of his comments on.
Just put your fingers up on the screen. You don't have to see it at all. You can
just hide it like this as it's going by, you can just leap right over. Just keep scrolling really fast when you get to it. And as I said in my little headline rant, American Beauty was the worst Oscar winner I ever saw until Shape of Water came along, and they were both had the same problems. Just Shape of Water had more of them. Just this sort of knee-jerk anti-suburban, anti-family, anti-military, sort of cliches. And the kids know everything, and the parents are dumb, and it's like, or worse in Chris Cooper's case. He was a great actor, but they're all good actors. The cast was great. The bag that floats around, that's the most beautiful thing that you ever saw.
Hey, it's better than Forrest Gump's feather, right?
What? Also 1990s though, right?
That's right.
And that was also an Oscar award winner, and usually gets cited as one of the injustices of the best picture selection. I forget, there was what was up against Forrest Gump? There was a couple of other ones that were up against it should have won.
I don't know. I mean, I remember the whole Shakespeare in Love versus Saving Private Ryan controversy. Yeah, I mean, there's been crashes, and people look down on that movie as a best picture winner. Yeah, it happens, and I haven't been enamored with a lot of the recent best picture winners. I just don't think they're very good, or they don't have that cachet. But that's maybe a story for another day, because I think it's just hard picking out great movies these days.
It is. It's not easy picking out great movies. That's part of what the issue is. Just isn't, because there just aren't a whole lot of them. But let's move on to cancel culture. And this is something that you're writing about today, which is the question as to whether or not Hollywood is waking up to the horrors of cancel culture. And you cite a Nicolas Cage movie, Dream Scenario, which I kind of heard about before. I don't know if you were writing about it before, or if I've read it someplace else.
I'm a little late to the party because it's been out a couple of weeks, I think, and I just caught up with it.
Oh, well, that must be what it is. So tell us a little bit about Dream Scenario, and tell us how much of the scenery that Nicolas Cage actually chooses.
That's the thing. He doesn't even nibble. It's a great performance. He plays a college professor. He's kind of nerdy. He's not a cool guy. He's just a middle-aged guy, your everyman. And for some reason, he starts to appear in the dreams of everybody, many people that are living near him, others as well. And he's just like floating in, like almost like a passerby in the dream. So he gets this odd notoriety, and he leans into it because he really is just a generic soul, and it's a little bit of kind of viral fame. And so he's enjoying it and trying to make the most of it. And there's a woman who's coming on to him, which, much younger than him, and she's very attractive. So he's intrigued by this, and all this is very engaging, and you're not really explaining how could this possibly happen. But then he starts appearing in the dreams, but as a more sinister force, where he's choking people and attacking people and chasing people. And all of a sudden he is, persona non grata, and essentially he is canceled by the community. And it's all about, I'm trying to give as much as I can about the movie without giving away too much, but that's the central thesis. And a lot of the dialogue does speak to being canceled, all the different things that we know about right now in the culture. I actually thought it was maybe a little bit too heavy-handed at times, but I didn't see that coming. And a couple of the quick thoughts here. One is, good for a storyteller, bringing the subject to the fore. It really does matter. The film has, I think at last checked, a 92% fresh rating at Rotten Tomatoes. So I thought that my liberal peers would be like, "Ooh, they're making fun of cancel culture. I hate it." But they're not having that reaction. And again, like I just teased, Nicolas Cage, he can be Nicolas Cage on steroids. We've seen it before. We love him for it, but it is a bit tiring. But here he is completely in character, completely not that Nicolas Cage. It's an excellent performance. And the film has real issues in the third act, and I found that very disappointing. But this is an interesting movie, an interesting perspective, and another great turn by him.
I think of Nicolas Cage's in the same way that I think it was Michael Medved described Richard Burton many years ago. Michael's still around, by the way, but Richard Burton clearly is not, which is that Richard Burton reminded him of the nursery rhyme about the pretty little girl with the curl on her forehead, is that, when he's good, he's very, very good, but when he's bad, he's horrid. And sort of Nicolas Cage too. And he can be so very, very good. And so I'm glad to hear it. I'm glad to hear that, and again, this is Dream Scenario, which is
out in limited release right now. I imagine it might be on video on demand soon. I think it's the kind of movie they'll probably push into that format soon. But my story also talks about Tar from last year, which was Kate Blanchett, and that she played a conductor, and she was essentially canceled. And so that was another movie that touched on this pretty directly about this whole, your personal life, your private life, how it influences your career, how other people respond to you. And then I just heard there's a new show coming soon called, I think it's Douglas is Canceled, which again directly covers this material. And I'm thinking, well, it took you a long time, Hollywood, because we did, this has been around for a while. It's been really hurting us, and it needs to be explored. And I think artists are it's a good way to kind of get into the story by telling adventures about it and comedies and other things. So I'm glad it's happening, and I'm glad it's not like, hey, cancel culture is great. Wish we had more of it, because I don't think that's the sense I'm getting from these stories.
Well, and then we also have American Fiction,
Yeah,
which I also haven't seen. I've seen the trailer for it. The trailer is hilarious.
it is.
Is that out yet? Has that been out? Or is
Either
that
the 15th of December or 22nd. I'm not quite sure. It
Oscar
may
bait?
also be in limited release. Some of these Oscar bait movies, if they don't have the huge budgets, they kind of put them out quietly in select cities, then they expand if they do well. So,
But I mean, this is another. I don't know if that's, at least in terms of what I saw in the trailer, I don't know if that's directly on cancel culture, but what it is on is wokeism and the I think you can say it satirizes the assumptions behind cancel culture.
Yeah, it's adjacent. It's not directly talking about cancel
Yeah.
culture, but woke and cancel culture, they are symbiotic. So you can't have one without the other. And it's getting, American Fiction is getting a lot of raves so far, which is interesting again. And I've seen it. I don't think I'm allowed to speak fully as far as a review purpose, but
Right.
yeah, the trailer is indicative of some of the key themes in the movie. And it's good that we're having conversations around it. And so we'll see. It's maybe even a sleeper for Best Picture. Well, again, we're a little too early, but it would be intriguing for a movie like this to come out and make some noise and turn the heads of a lot of film critics. And some of them have seen it at festivals, so they're allowed to speak. It's kind of a weird situation. I try to be I don't want to lose my credit card. My credit card.
No, totally. And you should abide by whatever embargoes that, you've agreed upon. We don't want to worm anything out of you here, but I'm looking forward to that, because I think again, this is more of the type of films that I'm usually interested in. And and they're out there. There's not as many of them. And so you don't get the wide range of good quality examples. I'm trying to think the one that, there's another one about literary world, which was with Michael Caine and Aubrey Plaza, and I can't remember the name of it.
Was it Bestsellers or something?
Bestseller. Okay. That's correct. And that was far from a perfect film, but it was a good film. And it told a kind of real story that also had a little bit to do with social, a little bit of satirizing of social media. But it had a great performance from Michael Caine. It had it had some real emotional resonance, as opposed to just some mindless, manipulative stuff. And it was fun. It was I like Aubrey Plaza on screen. She's very good. Michael Caine is legendary for good reasons. But those are the kind of smaller stories that just generally tend to disappear from the box office. And there aren't a whole lot of them out there.
The good thing is that you can find them on streaming platforms, maybe even Tubi for free. But you're right, they get buried. I mean, there's only so much room in the marketplace. A story like that doesn't have the snap, crackle, and pop that's going to draw people in. And then all of a sudden, even though you have the great Michael Caine, and he says he's retired now, so it's one of his last performances. Even that's not enough of a draw. So it's a weird world we live in, where there is some stuff you can seek out and be entertained by, but you have to seek it out. You have to really dig for it sometimes.
What do you think about festivals? Should people who are interested in, non-blockbuster epic, CGI thing, should people really pay more attention to the festivals? I've been to a few festivals. Well, a couple of festivals. And for the most part, you want to applaud the effort.
Wow, that hurts.
It's just, well, because the ones that I've been to are very, I don't want to say small. They're very enthusiastic. People put a lot of effort into them,
Yeah.
but they are really looking at stuff from first time filmmakers, first time writers, people who are just trying to crack into the business with what would normally be kind of like student films, the quality of student films. And so you don't want to go to a film festival and say, I give this one star because it doesn't resonate with me. I didn't like the way that they did their cuts and their wipes. It's like, come on, dude. You gotta, there's context here, and unlike the Ivy League presidents this week, context actually really does apply when you're dealing with this thing.
You're giving context a bad name.
Yeah, I know, no kidding. But I mean, people should be looking more to the festivals to look for those types of films.
I don't disagree. And I think there's various levels, like you mentioned, there's sort of the starter festival kit in a way. And you have to begin somewhere. You have to learn, you have to grow. And those could be very good beginner steps. I will say, on the festival circuit, there's such a groupthink that's happening now that I find very frustrating. I get all these different press releases from a lot of films, and most of them are indie films. And it's the transgender character and his search for meaning. And it's about a small town at USA that hates people of color and how they grow. And it's just, not that these stories shouldn't be told. Every story should be told, but it just seems so consistent and so monolithic in a way. And so my ding on festivals now is that they don't have a real variety of thought. There's been some really interesting right of center or even just eccentric films in recent years that would never get a chance at the festival circuit. I'll mention just one. It's called Uppity from a few years ago. It's a movie about a black race car driver, true story documentary, but it's directed by Adam Carolla, who the hoi polloi, they don't like him because he doesn't really follow their rules. And here's this really well-told documentary about this powerful figure who was an icon as far as civil rights and sports. And it wouldn't get a look at a festival because it was attached to Adam Carolla. So, I think that's what is a bugaboo for me. Yeah. I find that frustrating. It just, Sundance is coming up next month. It's going to be the same kinds of stories, the same vision, the same perspective. Why not shake things up a bit? And wouldn't that be exciting?
Oh, well, it'd be a change anyway, but yes.
Yeah.
And that's the point. Hollywood needs to be shaken up a little bit here. And I think audiences are kind of signaling their desire for that.
And we talk about universities it should be a hub for discussion and debate and free thought and all these great conversations, and it's not. But I think film is something similar. It should be a place where all these different perspectives can go. And I'll get 16 press releases about how this is the most diverse lineup that Sundance has ever had, and there's so many people of color behind the scenes. Well, great, but they're all telling similar stories. I want a diversity of story as much as I want a diversity of the people telling them. I think that's as important.
Exactly. Well, Christian Toto, we're going to have to leave it at that because I think we've kind of reached the end of our time here. But you can find out more. You can find out lots more, by the way, HollywoodandToto.com. Find out all you wanted to know about American Beauty, 1999.
Hollywood. What an Oscar, man! I'm.
You can find out all you need to know about Shape of Water at hotair.com. You got to look up my movie review for that one. But yeah. But HollywoodandToto.com. He's got his own podcast there as well. Twitter at HollywoodandToto. And anything else that I'm leaving out, Christian?
That's it. I just want to mention that I spoke to George Slaughter a couple of days ago for my podcast. He is a comedy icon. He created Laugh-In. We had a great conversation. I was a little sad that his defense of Joe Biden was so resolute, but otherwise we had a good chat. I hope people check it out on my podcast because the guy's a legend, man. He's done it all, seen it all. And he's got some great stories.
There you go. Got to go check out the podcast for that alone, but there's lots more there too. So HollywoodandToto.com. You can find all the links there. Christian Toto, thanks so much for joining us.
My pleasure.